Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as skeptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. Hello everybody, welcome back to Still Unbelievable. This is your regular hosts Matthew and Andrew with returning guest David. Hello both of you, welcome back into the studio. We're here back to continue reviewing the video that we started a week ago. How are you both? Have you had a good week?
Yep,
yes,
good for me.
The last 30 minutes has been particularly good.
Excellent, I'm glad to hear it. For listeners, if you are picking up Still Unbelievable the first time, can I suggest that you rewind one episode and go and watch part one, or listen to part one rather, because it was an audio podcast, not a video podcast. Go back and listen to part one. And this is part two of Matthew, Andrew and David reviewing a video on Sean McDowell's YouTube channel, where Sean McDowell is interviewing John Marriott PhD, and they're discussing the question, why do Christians abandon their faith? So we've done the first 33 minutes of this video. We're going to finish off the video in this session, so two-parter, and we're going to pick up straight on where John Marriott is introducing a new theme in the reasons of Christians leaving Christianity and where is it that they land.
Initially, the initial reaction is a knee-jerk reaction from us as believers because we feel a sense of betrayal.
I had a former Christian who went more the progressive Christian route than the atheist route, and described how painful it was, how so many people he really thought were Christians had treated him poorly. And when I was on the road, I met a man, he goes, I'm his last friend who didn't bail on him. I thought, man, what is the matter with us? Now, with that said, you might know on my show, I recently had on Drew, who's a YouTube star, a young man, 27 years old, the genetically modified skeptic, just to share his story of deconversion. And I asked him, is there anything positive that Christians did? And he said, yeah, he had a friend who, when he came out to him, told him he was atheist. He was kind of like, okay, like, what next? In other words, we're friends. This doesn't change anything. I love you. And that was a positive step in his journey. So we're not yet to what Christians need to do to respond better, but you're revealing some very big holes in our friendship as Christians and how we treat people we need to do a lot better at. And I love that you bring this up. Now, what other kinds
So before Sean finishes that question and John answers, just quickly for me, I have had mixed responses from Christians on this. Some Christians have shut me off on social media in the 10 years since I've been much more open about my atheism. But this whole question of what will those friendships look like afterwards was something that created a lot of pain and a lot of anxiety for me when I was deconstructing, because I simply realized that I didn't know some of my Christian friends well enough to be able to predict how they would respond to me. And that was a really difficult period in my deconstruction. You know, these are people who I only knew as Christians, saw most of them in a church environment, did some socializing with them outside of church, but not as much as I'd liked. So for some of these Christians who I counted as friends, they're still core friends now, but my relationship with them was very much seated, cloaked, if you like, within the Christian culture in which we were, and never anywhere else. And that realization that I didn't know how these people were going to respond to me being really open about how deep my doubts were going was quite unsettling for me. And because of all the stories that I'd read about people leaving Christianity and how much their Christian friends and their Christian family members and their Christian spouses had abandoned them, that creates quite a lot of fear with me. So you've got that fear of all those stories and will it happen to me? And then that realization that the friendships that you have with these Christians aren't strong enough that you don't know what's going to happen, and that you are worried that there's some conditionality behind all these friendships. That creates a really difficult place for the person who's got to such a level in their doubts that they fear that they're actually going to leave Christianity. So what I'd like to say to Christians who would be listening to this is be far more affirmative in your friendship with other people. Don't leave them with that nagging doubt that your friendship is conditional, because what you're doing is you then create further problems. And if your friendship is so conditional that you cut people off, then you are literally driving people away from the church. So that's a bit of my personal experience of that, what Sean said brought up for me. Do you two have any thoughts on that bit?
Just real quick, in another possible universe, I might have said something about, the aspect of changing. That universe is not even possible. In this universe, I just want to say that progressive Christianity is a whole different animal. There's a reason why I don't deal with it all that much on my show. If you want to put the lie display the lie to an apologist who says, "Oh no, I'm not a fundamentalist," just note at how they treat the idea of progressive Christianity. They hate it, I think, more than they hate atheism itself, and it always comes out if the right buttons are pushed. And so, to the degree that a Christian despises progressive Christianity is the degree that you can tell how conservative they really are.
Good insight.
In some alternate world, David just stole my comment.
Awesome.
So yeah, not done with that. A few minutes ago, by recording time, I said that Christians don't just have problems with non-Christians who walk away. They have problems with atheists. They have problems with other Christians. And Sean just said so. I had a friend. Let me just quote it. I happened to write it down. I had a friend who was a former Christian who went more the progressive Christian route. So this guy doesn't have this friend. He doesn't have the right to self-report on his own internal landscape. Sean has a better right to report about how he feels about his Christianity. He's somehow now, in Sean's view, less a Christian because he's progressive. But I'd like for you, the listeners, to consider the actual problem here. If Sean has the right to do a better job of reporting on someone else's internal landscape, what is to stop anyone else from saying the same thing? Oh yeah, well Sean's not actually a real progressive. He's just a radical white nationalist using Christianity as a disguise, for instance. So the problem is when we start this sort of public comment on some other person's internal state, we not only damage our possibility of having a conversation about the topic, but we damage the idea of conversation when we think that we have the right to pass that sort of judgment on as if it is more true than the other person's internal state and their report about it. I'll leave it there.
Right. Thanks both. Right, let's carry on because now Sean is going to go back into asking John any other questions. So we'll see where the conversation goes now.
Of painful emotions did deconverts share with you?
Well, as you can imagine, if Christianity is at their word, the core of their identity, who they were, what they had poured their life into, their social circles, maybe they grew up in a Christian home. Once they start to come out and identify as someone who doesn't believe this anymore, then lots of dominoes start to fall that are out of their control. There are parents who will disown them. I can think of one woman who told her mother that she was no longer a Christian and her mother wouldn't speak to her any longer because of that. And even on her deathbed, turned away from her daughter and wouldn't speak to her because she had left the faith. right? So there are family problems that people have because parents are so passionate and so concerned for their kids, they just don't really know how to deal with it, and there's kind of an anger there, wanting them to sort of snap out of it and come back to the faith. There are relational problems with spouses. I mean, I can only imagine what would happen in my life if my wife said, I'm no longer a Christian, I don't believe any of this anymore, and I'm not going to support anything that you do, and I'm not going to go to church anymore. And eventually her friendships would eventually evaporate. Our marriage would probably really suffer if it would even last. There's an existential issue where people say, wow, I once knew who I was. I was made in the image of God. I had real dignity. I had value. My life had meaning. And now I don't have really any of those things. I need an entirely new framework to think about myself and the world around me. So there's an entire worldview shift that people go through, and identity is a huge, huge part of that. So
I'm going to stop here before John starts winding up that bit. They've basically gone and reinforced the things that we've said, but I wanted to add to that and put out the point that yes, those bits are all true. There is a worldview shift when you ditch Christianity, because when you ditch Christianity, you are abandoning a whole worldview, and you need to replace that with something. You need to ask yourself some really basic questions, and these questions depend on the brand of Christianity that you're coming out of. For me, I really did believe that morality comes from God, and so I genuinely laid awake at night for night after night after night, thinking, what sort of person am I going to be in the morning? Will I have zero morals? Will I be unable to determine right from wrong? Will I suddenly find that I could go and do something horrific and not feel bad about it? I mean, obviously the answer is no. But I was fed on such a fundamentalist brand of Christianity that and this kind of morality can only come from God, and therefore if you believe in God, you can only be a good person by believing God. That has so seeped into my way of thinking that when I started doubting God, I started doubting these kinds of things, and I hadn't realized the depth with which the roots of this kind of thinking had in my mind, that the reality of that kind of implantedness simply didn't occur to me until I started questioning the very existence of God. And then with that questioning came all these other things which I just accepted from a very young age. I only had in my being because of the existence of God. And so it changes you, and it changes you quite fundamentally, and it changes you in ways that individually are not predictable. Yes, there are patterns, but the experience that you have only depends on the Christianity that you come out of. And then it genuinely does affect the relationships. I've already said, about the friendship, etc. So I won't repeat all of that of John, but it changes. And I think, again, if you're a Christian listening to this, please stop and think about what is going on in the mind of the person that is doubting. If someone's being honest enough with you about their doubts, rather than thinking about how it's affecting you, think about them. Think about how it's affecting them, because John is quite right here. He hasn't gone strong enough on some of these things, but he is right here in that the changes that happens to the individual that's doubting and questioning. Do you know if you guys want to add to that?
Just really quick, if I can piggyback on your thought, because it's the thought that I had in my mind from the beginning of this section. It's not just that you have to reevaluate everything. It's that you're walking away from a system where there are easy answers to a system where there are no answers. So one of the appeals of Christianity is, or any religion for that matter, is that all your hard issues, all your big existential issues, all your moral issues, they're answered. There's an answer. It's in the Bible, or it's in the Quran, or it's in the prophets. It's in the Pope. He'll tell you what to think about this. And so you really are offloading the hard work of morality when you buy into a system like religion. and you don't realize how much you've offloaded until you get out of it. And then you've got to really start from scratch, thinking about everything. What do I think about this? What do I think about abortion now? What do I think about gay rights now? Is this wrong? Why is it wrong? Why do I think this? Why, what are my justifications? You've got to start from scratch and do the hard work of figuring out the hard answers. And that's both the downside of having no religious faith and the upside.
Yep.
I guess I have a very different path out than you guys had. We were just talking about dignity and value and worth in that last sentence, Matthew, right before you pressed pause. And I think that was a great place to sort of stop the conversation, because this idea that I lost Christianity and then I had to reevaluate my worldview is wrong. Wrong. It's not only wrong, it's wrong-headed. I questioned my dignity, value, and worth every time my life took a significant turn for the worse. And I found myself laying in the mud, praying to God to help me through. And there was no answer. I questioned God's commitment to human dignity, value, and worth every time I walked into a hospital and I saw a child with a broken arm. I questioned dignity, value, and worth when I started really considering the rights and wrongs of abortion. You see, here's the problem. You can have a religious view, but religious views don't solve this problem of dignity, value, and worth. And if you think they do, you're not paying attention to why people are leaving Christianity faster today than at any other time in history. People are leaving before. We're leaving when we find that Christianity has a problem with dignity, value, human worth. And if Christianity answered those questions in any meaningful way, you wouldn't have skeptics.
Thank you for that, Andrew.
Be some of the really big changes that people go through and why it can be really, really hard for them. Because for us, when someone converts to becoming a Christian, there's an entire network and infrastructure for them to join and be a part of. There's a community, the church, and there's Christian groups and youth groups, and there's lots of literature they can read and television shows and radio programs. But when someone loses their faith, they're kind of out there by themselves until they can eventually find some kind of a group. And this is why the internet has become so helpful. It's become the de facto church for deconverts.
That makes sense.
I'd like to just stop there and give a shout out to a friend of the show, David the Graceful Atheist. He talks an awful lot about humanity and about community and about secular grace. And he does a lot of that. So if you don't already listen to David's podcast, go and listen to that. And there are Facebook groups now where people share their deconversion stories or share their needs both during deconversion and after deconversion, during deconstruction and after conversion. So John's right again there. The internet and social media has genuinely helped to these. When it was me doing it, it was blogs I went to, and there were communities around blogs, and we followed each other's blogs and we anticipated each other's blog posts. And that was a really good point in time for me, building up those community things. I've stopped doing the writing of my blog now, and I'm, as you are already aware, because you're listening to this, I'm now into podcasting, and I'm quite vocal on Facebook and various Facebook groups. So my community has moved as well, but I love the people that I podcast with, and I love the people that I spar with and agree with and share with on various Facebook groups as well. It is a good community. It is fun to talk and share and get encouragement from other people. It's not all about the fighting. If you're a Christian and you see some of the things that I post on social media, yes, you may feel that all I want to do is stab and jab. That isn't my community. I don't get a huge amount of benefit from that. The benefit in the community I get are from my fellow deconverts, from being a support for my fellow deconverts, from from seeing the questions that other people ask, from sometimes being able to answer them myself or being able to ask my own question, or seeing the various things that people are saying to each other and helping each other, and maybe just chiming in saying, yes, so-and-so said something really good there, and trying to be supportive and helpful, because there are many, many people who come out of Christianity deeply hurting, and they need that community and they need that support. And quite often they're not getting any of that from Christians. And so I genuinely get a lot of satisfaction from seeing and being a part of that support network of people who are leaving, because it is tremendously important, especially when, as has already said, it comes at the loss and the cost of previously deeply held relationships. How do you guys find post-Christian community?
A quick thought. I love community. I'm a big fan of post-Christian community, and maybe we can do a whole show on that topic. My only advice to people in transition from Christianity to some type of atheist community is don't just swap one set of prepackaged beliefs for another set of prepackaged beliefs.
Yeah.
That's how you got in the mess in the first place, at least partly. Do the hard work. Do the heavy lifting of figuring out what you believe, of figuring out right and wrong, of wrestling with some of the issues. Do the hard work yourself, and don't just take some prepackaged system that's, where someone else has done the hard work. So that's my only contribution there. But yeah, I'm a big believer in community, and I hope to be able to contribute to that someday.
I think my problem with the notion of Christian community is that you can only have it under the leadership's rules. We saw it just a few minutes ago. Sean actually, he just went ahead and said it out loud. I had this friend who didn't become a skeptic. He went more the progressive Christian route. Oh, and then, by the way, in the next story, there's someone else, and only one Christian friend left. My notion of community, folks, is the notion of community that doesn't abandon you when you say, I no longer believe in God. My notion of community is one that rallies around when things are hardest. The problem with Christianity is that it doesn't rally around its members when they start experiencing a crisis of faith. That's what we're hearing here. My notion of community is a notion of community that includes rallying around people when times are their hardest. And by the way, I don't mean bringing a casserole when someone dies.
Mm.
So, yes, we need community. We all need it. The question is, what kind of community do you want? Do you want a community where you are free to be yourself? Do you want a community where you are free to explore the limits of your own humanity? By the way, that doesn't mean eating babies. Or do you want a community where you fear the loss of it? The moment that you have a thought that might be in opposition to the leadership.
Mm.
So many more questions for you, but we have some really thoughtful questions coming in. I'm going to ask you one more, and then we're going to spend about the last 20 minutes or so making sure that we allow people to ask you some questions. And more we'll tell you about at the end. Here's something that you write, John, that I thought is real helpful. You said to avoid setting people up for crisis of faith, you suggest, quote, we avoid instilling a stifling and restrictive faith in believers by placing on them no greater burden than necessary for them to be Christians. What do you mean by not placing a greater burden on people necessary to be Christians?
Right. Well, this is where people will start to turn the channel off if I say the wrong thing. In the book of Acts, You have the First Jerusalem Council, where there is this argument that's going on between the believers who are saying, look, we have these Gentiles who are now followers of Jesus, and we think that we should be making them follow all of the Jewish kosher laws. And then you have another sect saying, no, we shouldn't impose on them any burden that's greater than what's required. And the argument that carries the day is the argument by James, who says, look, we don't need to have these folks believe and hold on to extra Jewish kosher laws. And I'm trying to say something sort of analogous to that, which would be this, is that there is this historical Christian orthodoxy that goes back to the first century, that is expounded in the text of the scripture, but is actually really laid out and distilled in some of the early creeds. And in those creeds, they say that here are the boundary markers of what it means to be a Christian. If you go past these and you have different views than these, then you are non-orthodox. You are not in the right belief anymore. But those beliefs are you could distill them all to less than half of a page: Apostles' Creed, Nicene Creed, etc.
Yeah.
And what I would want to say is that it's really important for our young people to grow up and understand what the essentials and the non-negotiables are when it comes to the faith. And I think that the creeds are a good guide for that. After that, there are some secondary doctrines that might be important to us and that we might be persuaded of. Our denomination or our church community might say, we really think that this is the way that the New Testament church ought to meet. Or we think that women ought to wear head coverings. Or we think that speaking in tongues is really important. But I think that all of those have to be secondary and tertiary doctrines that we're willing to say, look, these are important, and we think that as Christians we need to follow Jesus's word, and we need to study it and know it. But we also need to have an intellectual humility that says, but we're not exactly certain that we're completely right on our interpretation of these texts, because other Christians disagree. And so there is freedom there to think through and maybe to hold or reject some of these different views. But when it comes to these top tier non-negotiables, those are the ones that I think that we need to be able to say, hey, look, it's super important that you believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and that human beings are created in the image and in the likeness of God.
Right, so that's probably a really good place to stop. I agree in terms of the Christian ethos. Christians need to shrink down their demands of their fellow Christians to core doctrine, I think was the phrase that John said there. But of course, the question is, what's a core doctrine and what isn't? And I think in amongst the various Christian denominations, that in itself is a very interesting bun fight. And frankly, in my post-Christian days, it's not really a bun fight that I'm really interested in having, although it might be quite interesting to watch it from a distance. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
James was almost right. The idea that we didn't need historical orthodoxy about what people could eat. Well, it's almost right. We just don't need historical orthodoxy. And you can see this. So there's this idea that we should somehow be humble about these secondary and tertiary doctrines. That's the point in play here. But there are certain non-negotiables. I don't agree. I don't agree that there are non-negotiables in this sense. If you're a Christian and you're listening and you think, well, Andrew's saying we can negotiate murder, we can negotiate rape, we can negotiate child abuse. That is not what I'm saying, and just stop. Just stop. The point here had to do with primary, secondary, and tertiary doctrines. And I will simply say doctrine is a matter of debate. I don't care what level you're talking about. David, I have a feeling that in some alternate universe, I may have just stolen your answer.
I can tell you in that alternate universe, I have already shanked you to death.
Is that negotiable?
Not in a good way. So yeah, I'm just gonna repeat the answer as if I didn't hear it. Um, so this is the I did a show on this. I want to say in the first season of SNS. It may have been the second season, but I challenged the idea of orthodoxy itself. That there, and my thesis statement was there is no such thing as the Orthodox Christian faith. It just doesn't exist. And so this idea that you can return to orthodoxy is not true. And the reason why it's not true, and you can figure it out if you think about it. Christianity is a thing that is built on other things. It is like a building of Jenga blocks that's built on the one below it and one below it. So you can't even talk about Christian orthodoxy until you talk about Judaism. And there is no Jewish orthodoxy either, because just look at how the Jews debate Jewish orthodoxy. They have no idea what it is. And so it's not like Jesus came along and said, okay, you need to believe these 5 specific things and, these 10 things about worship and these 3 things about salvation. That doesn't exist. The closest thing to any type of organized systematic theology is Romans. And by the time you get there, the church has been around for a while, and even that's not systematic. And so if it was so clear what the orthodoxy was, no one would have ever formed a creed, for instance. They would have just said, well, it's just the Bible. But of course, we have the Apostles' Creed. And then, well, what about the Nicene Creed? Well, why did we need the Nicene Creed? Because the other creed wasn't all that clear and agreeable. And why did we need the other creed after that? Because, well, maybe that wasn't quite right either. This idea that there is this thing that you can go back to and refer to and focus everybody on is just a myth. It doesn't exist in Christianity. It doesn't exist in Judaism. And the only religions where it does exist in are fairly new. I would say that Mormonism actually does a pretty good job of wrangling their orthodoxy ish, but Christianity, not even close.
So before, Matthew, if you'll give me one more second, David and I came from a Christian background that makes a big deal out of covenants. And David, something you were talking about there made me think of the idea that the Christian covenant, the Jewish covenant. Well, one of the interesting things about Christianity is it's not the second covenant that God had with humanity. It's actually the third. So what was the first one? The first one was a covenant with Adam and Eve, right? And that covenant gets modified in Genesis 3:15 and following. And then you have the covenant with the Jews. And oh boy, could we do a series of shows there. But somehow that covenant's not good enough either. And then there's this third covenant, this Christian covenant. And somehow that covenant is not any good either, because Christians don't actually want the covenant that they're under. And I will just say that it looks to me like God's covenants, if you believe there's a God, works about as good as software engineering. And I'll just tell you, I don't have any confidence that version 4.0 of the covenant you're hoping for will be any better than version 1.0 of the covenant that he scrapped.
Yeah, and I also want a second bite of this apple. I'm sorry. I'll make up for it by saying nothing the next time. Okay? Promise.
I don't believe you.
So it's it has to do with the history that Andrew and I share, religiously speaking. So one of our founding fathers, and actually it probably didn't originate there either, but was fond of saying something to the effect that we want to reduce doctrine to a few fundamental things upon which all reasonable people can agree. This was a strong idea in the beginning of our movement. I think it was Barton W. Stone who used to say this, but this was an idea that captivated me even as a kid. But I started to realize it was problematic, probably in my teens, because I was a reasonable person, and even I didn't agree with everything in our denomination. And the challenge, of course, is when it comes to religion, there is no reasonable set of things. So your set of what is reasonable for you may be not reasonable for me, and vice versa. And so it's very hard to come up with a set of things that all reasonable people will agree on, at least religiously speaking. And so I think the very effort to do so is somewhat doomed, because if you think you're a reasonable person and you think that you've got a good list of the bare minimum things and someone else has a different list, suddenly they're unreasonable and you're off to the races with schism.
And there's been a good number of schisms over church history. I've been in several churches where there have been splits or people have left, and it can be quite traumatic for all the people involved, especially those who are trying to stop it, trying to sort of do what John has done in this segment that we've just heard, trying to get people together. Say, we simply believe in a God and worship a God, and we believe it's the same God. Can't we get on together? These other things are not critical to our Christian faith and belief. And, well, yes, that is technically true. What is happening in those splits isn't over Christian belief. It's personalities and people and people wanting to express their way. And if you're not expressing their way, they can still accept you as a Christian. They just don't want to express with you. And lots and lots of hurt happens this way. And Christians have hurt each other deeply by splitting churches into multiple parts through things like this. I remember as a young Christian here in the UK, sometime around about 1989, we had a Bishop of Durham here in the UK. I can't even remember his name now, John something or other. And he made headlines here in the UK by saying that Jesus didn't physically rise from the dead. Jesus' resurrection is a metaphor, and he lives in our hearts. It wasn't a real physical resurrection. And he devastated Christians throughout the country. I remember the church that I went to, and the very next meeting that we had at the church, the minister of the church stood at the front of the church and affirmed those comments and said, yes, he's right. Jesus lives in us. That is the resurrection of Jesus. It wasn't a physical, literal resurrection. And I just don't know where my mind was when I left that, because it was the first time I'd heard that expressed earlier that week in the newspapers. And then here was somebody who I admired and trusted saying it while standing physically in front of me. I never believed that I would actually meet another Christian who would say such a thing. And here I was hearing it from the minister of the church that I intend to. It was a tough time for me. It was genuinely quite devastating. I didn't leave the church there and then, but what happened was I ended up moving house, and I went to a church that was near me because it was convenient, and the church I used to go to was just too far away to go when I was passing multiple churches on the way. So I didn't leave out of bad feeling. I left purely out of practicality. But it was a very strange moment for me. And I moved on from that. And it is possible to move on from that kind of thing. But, Christians have very, very different beliefs, and things that under John's banner here aren't critical to the affirmation of the label Christian. But you'll still find Christians who hold beliefs that you as a Christian can't cope with for one reason or another. You need to answer the question on how you deal with that. So I admire what John's trying to do here. I just don't think it's possible. I think there will always be situations which create such conflict that getting on isn't possible. The whole, are Catholics really Christian, is a big issue still in the Protestant congregations, and the same the other way around. There are Catholics who think that they're the only people who are true Christians. Forget about what John's just said about believing in the same God and believing in the core doctrines. There are periphery doctrines which genuinely create significant problems, and Christianity is going to be burdened with these forever. I don't think this is a problem that Christianity can do away with, because there are far too many denominations and there are far too many variations within each denomination. I think the evolution of Christianity has spread so far. There are so many different species of Christianity that it's impossible for there to be any kind of uniting core set of beliefs. It simply can't happen.
How he did that, you can be very persuaded that it's 6 days, or you can be persuaded that it's a long period of time, or it's something in between, and allow people that flexibility. Because without that flexibility, we build this very rigid and very fragile house of cards theology that says, if you don't believe X, then the entire Christian edifice crumbles. And someone says, I don't think I believe X anymore. For example, I think evolution is true. Then that card gets pulled out, the whole house of faith collapses.
I didn't know where you were going when I got to the end of the book, but when I read you describing what you just described, to me it was like a breath of fresh air. My philosophy is, let's find unity on the essentials and have as much charity as we can on secondary but important issues. So the intersection of science and faith, and whether or not evolution is true or God used evolution, that's a very important question in terms of theology, in terms of science, but it's not necessarily a faith-defining question. Same with inerrancy. You and I both work at Biola in different capacities, and part of working there is we believe in inerrancy. But neither of us are going to say if somebody doesn't believe in inerrancy, they're not a Christian. And to be a Christian, you have to embrace that doctrine. It's important for Christian living and other areas, but not essential to being a believer. I found even with contradictions, and this gets me in trouble too, if there were a contradiction in the Bible, it wouldn't mean Christianity's false. We would have to rethink what we mean by inerrancy, or if the Bible's inerrant or the Word of God. But what would prove Christianity false is if Jesus didn't exist or didn't rise from the grave. So I've heard Gary Habermas say, if evolution is true and Jesus rose from the grave, Christianity is true. And I think that's a great starting place that releases a burden upon many people who tend to grow up in a more fundamentalist faith. So I loved hearing you say that. Let's shift, if it's okay, to some questions, because there's some excellent questions here. Mark Corbett says, do people often deconvert to progressive Christianity before they go the rest of the way to atheism?
Right. Do you guys want to address the question before you hear John's answer, or do you want to hear John's answer first and then go through it?
I'm actually going to bow out of that question altogether because I spoke on it earlier. And so I'm going to fulfill a promise because I'm a man of some of my words.
Excellent. Andrea, should I just go through John's answer, or do you want to address it first?
Well, I'll just give a very quick answer so that my answer is not tainted to the listeners by what John says. And there's a witness to my walking away from Christianity who happens to be the guest on this show today. So when I walked away from conservative Christianity, I walked away from Christianity, period. I didn't go through a liberal deconversion.
I actually went through all of the liberal stages. So we went in very different directions.
We did. It was an interesting time, actually.
I remember spending an awful lot of time thinking about more liberal Christianity and whether or not I could settle on a more liberal Christianity. And I think for people who leave a type of fundamentalist Christianity that I did, I think most of them will probably ask the question. Actually, before I carry on there, Andrew, you say you just left and you didn't give much of a thought to liberal Christianity. Sorry, I'm putting words into your mouth there. Did you entertain the idea of liberal Christianity, and was it just for a very short period of time, or did you just go done with the whole lot?
Well, that's very hard to answer. So I think I can. It depends on what you mean by consider. Did I think about liberal Christianity, becoming a Presbyterian? So, for instance, I think I considered going to more liberal churches. But for me, the exit from Christianity was so well lit that there wasn't a more liberal doctrine was not going to save Christianity for me. Not because I didn't like that there were more liberal churches. I did. But my problem with Christianity didn't have to do with community. My problem with Christianity had to do with the way the world works, as far as I can tell. The world doesn't work the way conservative Christians want, and it doesn't work the way liberal Christians want. So I walked away altogether.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Andrew. I was more David's route out, and just as a point of observation, we've used the word liberal for a prefix with Christianity, whereas Sean has gone to use the word progressive. I'm assuming that we're using the two words interchangeably, but I suspect that there's a technicality between liberal Christianity and progressive Christianity that we're completely ignoring. Feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. We're being very, very fuzzy about our definitions and our uses of the words here. I just ask that you forgive us and you just take the ride with us. For me, I sat down and I thought long and hard about the more liberal, more progressive Christianity that I could settle on. And I spent a good amount of time thinking about various aspects of the fundamentalist Christianity I was leaving that I was rejecting. So I was rejecting literal creation. I was rejecting Adam and Eve. I was rejecting a lot of the miracles. I was rejecting huge chunks of the Old Testament, certainly the early Old Testament. So not just the flood, not just the Tower of Babel, not just the Exodus of Egypt, but also the far more recent stuff like the battles of Joshua and all that kind of thing as well. So I was rejecting a whole load of stuff, and I was pushing in onto territory that that many Christians even today consider unquestionable. And so as I was thinking about what it was that I would be left with, especially with no Adam and Eve, meaning no original sin, therefore meaning no real need for salvation from inherited sin. And I think for me, that was where the crux came. I thought, how can I really accept any form of Christianity if there is no requirement for a savior? If I'm tossing out the requirement for there to be a savior, Jesus, then there really is no point to any of Christianity whatsoever. And I'm just doing it because it's familiar. And I didn't want to do it because it was familiar. I wanted to do it because I could believe it. And I simply couldn't believe it. But I'm shortcutting months and months and months of painstaking thought processes here. So I suspect that a fair number go through a softer, more progressive, more liberal form of Christianity. I suspect it's the majority of people who come out of fundamentalist Christianity, but that is just purely because it's a gut feel and because it was a route that I took. I've got no real data on which to base that, to be quite honest. Let's see what John says.
Oh, now that is a good question. And I think that the jury is still out on this one. And I'm not sure whether I think progressive Christianity is a halfway house towards deconversion, or if it's the knot in the end of the rope that keeps somebody tethered to the faith, even if it looks quite a bit different than maybe where they started out. And so what I would say is I suspect that it's probably more of a halfway house, and that if someone were to do a study, you might find that people just sort of continue to head right on through progressive Christianity to more of a spiritual but not religious, to a none. But I'm not 100% sure about that.
Okay.
But I also think that there is something healthy and that there can be something good about deconstructing a faith that has been passed on to you from grandparents and parents, and saying, wait a minute, do I think that this really represents what the Bible teaches, and analyzing it and taking a look at it and asking those questions. And so I don't want to say that anyone who begins that process is necessarily someone who identifies as a progressive Christian, who questions perhaps maybe the authority of the Bible. But I do think that there's a fine line between deconstructing your faith in a healthy, helpful way and deconstructing it in a way that ends up outside the faith completely.
That's great.
Do you guys have any further thoughts on that? It's something I want to pick up from what John said, but I want to give you guys a chance first.
No, I think I'm gonna hold my mustard until they talk about the whole creationism thing.
Okay, I want to preface this with a question. To reset the field, we're talking about a move from conservative Christianity to progressive Christianity to spiritualism to none. First, I'm not sure that the field is quite that clear cut, but just giving it its best hearing, I think the question that I would ask of both people here is, do progressive Christians go to heaven? Why is that important? Because if they do, we can stop talking about progressive Christianity and conservative Christianity and whatever. And if they don't, we can stop calling progressive Christians Christians and call them alien sinners. I think the rest of this is just a smokescreen to well, I don't know to do what. I really don't. But if progressive Christians don't go to heaven, then they're not Christians. Because God saves Christians only and only Christians. That's the conservative view. And the rest of this, I think, is just smoke and mirrors.
Okay, I'm a dirty, rotten liar.
It's not strong enough.
I see that now. I've just learned something about myself. So, yeah, isn't it interesting that his progression is from conservative Christianity to progressive Christianity to atheism, and not, say, from progressive Christianity to conservative Christianity to atheism? It reveals a kind of thinking that they have that I think that Andrew is getting at, and that thinking is that progressive Christianity really isn't Christianity. Because if it was considered Christianity to them, they wouldn't consider it a stepping stone to atheism. They would consider it a great place to be, but they don't see it that way. And I would say the other thing is, isn't it interesting that they tacitly admit that progressive Christianity is easier to believe and easier to swallow? They're tacitly admitting that it's much harder to be a conservative Christian because they are, in fact, asking an awful lot of a person, whereas the progressive Christianity seems to ask less. And they have this idea, this mentality, this mindset that it has to be hard if it's going to be true and authentic. And so part of the knock against progressive Christianity is what we used to call easy believism. And, if it was easy, then it couldn't be right and it couldn't be worthwhile. Look, like I said, there's a reason why I don't talk much about progressive Christianity. I could do a whole series on progressive Christianity because I was there. So just a few insights. I was going to stay silent on this, and then it made me say stuff.
There is a flip side to what you guys have both pointed out about this whole attitude towards progressive Christianity that is a waypoint on your way out already. Is if you think of the reverse is becoming more fundamentalist, more restrictive, because you've got to show how strong your faith is, how good of a Christian you are, how firmly planted on the road to heaven you are, by becoming more extreme in the things that you believe. And this is where we get some of the utterly ridiculous things that are being said. This is the area of Christianity that fuels COVID denial, that fuels young earth creationism, that fuels some of the utterly ridiculous things that we've seen, QAnon and all that kind of ridiculous conspiracy nonsense that we see tied into Christianity. Because if you're getting further and further away from progressive Christianity, therefore you're going up, therefore you're becoming a better Christian, therefore all of these things must be associated with your wonderful Christianity. So there's an utter wretched, poisonous sink of gunk out that other end. And I think that is the end of Christianity that Christians need to be more afraid of. Progressive Christianity is certainly not that kind of cesspit, and you should bathe yourselves in the warm, welcoming waters of that, and you should flee from fundamentalist Christianity as fast as your legs can carry on. Which leads me straight into the bit that John said, which is the bit that I really wanted to pick up on, was about deconstructing the faith that's been passed on to you by parents and grandparents, or in my cases by missionary school teachers. And this is why I have a very, very tough attitude towards missionary work, towards teaching young children about Christianity. Andrew and I have done the Alpha series, and I keep promising that I'm going to do Youth Alpha. This is a conversation that Andrew and I are about to have, and we're going to try and arrange that. I can't promise before the end of this year, but I promise I will try that we'll get that review before the end of the year. But this is why I'm critical about things like that, which are aimed at young children, because it's giving them your set of beliefs before they're old enough and mature enough to think critically about the kind of beliefs that they want to have, before they've grown into a young adult and formed their own beliefs. What you're doing is you're poisoning their young adulthood with your beliefs before they can decide for themselves what it is that's acceptable for them to believe. And I don't think that's right. I think there's a gross immorality around pushing those kinds of beliefs onto young children. And I think we should encourage and we should welcome the challenge that young children give to us. My daughter will answer, I've said this before, my daughter will answer back to me. She'll challenge the things that I say to her. She'll ask me to justify the things that I say to her. And that's exactly the way it should be. And that's exactly the way I want it to be. It makes for a less comfortable role as a parent. It means that I have to explain things in a way that I'm not used to explaining them. And it means I have to have an adult conversation with my daughter. But all of those are good things because it makes me a better person and it makes her a better person. And I simply would not have it any other way. If I am not satisfied unless I've pushed what I think is right onto my daughter and don't accept her answering me back, then I have failed her and I have failed the world, and she will not thank me for it when she's an adult. And Christians, you should have exactly the same attitude with your young children. You should abolish your young children's groups where you've got somebody who's a strong person telling their children what it is they believe. You should absolutely abolish that kind of structure in churches, because what you do when you do that is you create people like me. And if you're a person who believes in Christianity, and if you're a person that believes Christianity is the way, you do not want people like me. And if you don't want people like me, stop creating people like me. And you stop creating people like me by stopping indoctrinating children. Okay, I can breathe again.
Answer. I appreciate that you don't overreach where the evidence is, but share what you suspect. I think that's great. Here's an interesting question, may or may not be in your wheelhouse, but I'd love to hear what you think. What are the statistics of deconversion with Christians that go to normal colleges? I would assume that would just be a non-Christian public college versus Christians that go to a Christian college.
Yeah, I was just...
So I'm pausing that. I'll give you two guys a moment to think about that question.
Okay, I'll give it a go. College is great. You should go if you can afford it. As far as Christian colleges and non-Christian colleges go, I actually think that Christian colleges are almost as bad as what you were saying about youth groups just now. Christian colleges are youth groups for 18-year-olds. It's a way for Christian parents to feel safe about letting their kids in the world, but making sure that they have a sheltered place where they don't have to ask the big questions and get faced with the hard stuff.
Yeah, I just want to thank the Christian college that I spent time at for making me a non-Christian.
I'm sure there's a joke in there. We don't have that Christian college structure here in the UK that you guys have, so I don't feel
you
like
have
I
Christian high schools. What are you talking about? You have Christians teaching church in high school. What do you need a Christian college for?
Fair enough. And the high school or secondary school, as we call it, I went to in the UK was nominally Christian. It was so progressive Christian, it probably didn't even recognize itself as Christian. It certainly wasn't fundamental. But anyway, I genuinely don't feel that I'm qualified to comment much more on this, so I'm going to go straight to what John says as a reply.
Reading a little bit about that today, and so the Assemblies of God did a study a number of years ago, and I can send that to you, Sean, if you'd like. And if that whoever's asking this question, Andrew, if you're asking the question, I can give you the results of that. And they say that people who go to a Christian college have a certain deconversion rate, but they're folks who went to public universities, their numbers were quite a bit higher. But there's a really interesting article that came out in Christianity Today a couple years ago, and I was just looking at it again today. And in it, they were saying that the vast majority of people who really wrestle and struggle with their faith are people who end up going to a Christian college as opposed to a public four-year institution. Yeah, and part of the reason I think for that is because when you're at the public four-year institution, if you have a core of faith that you're committed to, maybe you feel a little bit more like you're on the defensive and that you are standing up for the truth and that you're alone, you're sort of the minority. There's something almost noble about that. But when you go to a Christian university and you're having it's kind of being pushed on you and you're hearing in chapel in every class, and you start to go, do I really think that this is true? And so for folks who go to Christian universities, Christianity Today did this really interesting study. It was posted in there a few years ago, and they're pretty clear that the crisis of faith for people of faith at Christian schools is greater than those who go to non-Christian schools.
I think this is a really interesting statistic that John's come out with. The two studies that he mentions, the one from the Assemblies of God and the Christianity Today article, I've managed to find both of those. And if you're interested in looking into this further, the links to them will be in the show notes. So don't go testing your Google skills, dear listeners. I've already done it for you. Links in the show notes. But I'm intrigued by this statistic. I'm not familiar enough with the American college system to be able to comment with any kind of authority on that. But I do find it quite intriguing, what John has said. Thoughts, guys, before I move on to the next question?
I don't find it the case that the people that I know that I went to school with at a Christian university who lost their faith happen in greater numbers than the people that I know who went to public universities and lost their faith. I do think the reasons are very different in both cases. I've said this in past shows that the reason I walked away from Christianity after a Christian college education is because they taught me where the bodies were buried in Christianity. I'll give just one. Greek. We think of Greek as the original language of the people in the New Testament. But that almost certainly can't be the case for a great many of them, because a great many of them would have been Jewish speakers. And this is the kind of thing that just gets glossed over in everyday Christianity. Jesus probably wasn't a Greek speaker if he existed. Now, why is any of that important? Because when you get down to translation wars, if you think Greek is the language that Jesus spoke, so you have the original things he said, you're just probably wrong. This is just one small fact that comes up in Christian university education. It showed me where the bodies were buried in Christianity, and they didn't have good answers for some of the problems. That one's pretty trivial. Young Earth creationism, we all three have a history with young Earth creationism. Why did I walk away? Because in the best effort of a Christian university, they couldn't make sense of Christianity.
There's a difference in motives for the universities existing and the parents who send their kids to the universities. With a secular university, parents are interested in their kids getting a good education. With a Christian university, parents are interested in their kids maintaining the indoctrination and staying God believers.
They're just interested in their kids not having sex.
Well, okay, then they shouldn't send them to Christian universities. These are very different motivations. A lot of Christian universities boast about, their quality education program and their accreditation and such. And that's fine that they are, trying to compete at that level. But everyone knows that they don't exist to be the finest universities in the world. They exist so that they can perpetuate their church doctrines. This is why you don't just have Christian universities here in the States. You have denominationally specific universities. You have Southern Baptist universities and Church of Christ universities and Methodist universities and Presbyterian universities. This has absolutely nothing to do with educational excellence. And so there's just a big difference in motivation in the parents willing to pony up $30,000 a year for a secular university and parents ponying up $30,000 a year for a Christian university. One cares about truth and realism, if you will, and the other cares about religion. You should really think that through before you choose your university.
Okay, one last sentence. Conservative Christian universities really are a place to continue the purity cult.
Next question.
Now that's really interesting. When we say Christian universities, not all Christian universities are the same. I mean, you compare a Biola and its commitments and a girl I just talked with this weekend when I was speaking at church in Idaho. She said, I was told this is a conservative Christian school, and they're pushing all sorts of ideas that would concern you and me. So I'd love to see a careful, objective data done on this. Here's one for you. Another one I think is fascinating. These are really good questions. Paul Wilson says, what about the evidence that it is the father's attitude towards Christian faith, especially the importance of the habit of weekly worship, etc., which mothers fail to instill in children without spouses? Now, in other words,
I have a real problem with the way this question is phrased. It's a bit clunky in its language. Surely I can't be the only one who's getting a bucket full of misogyny from this question. All the fault seems to be piled on the mothers on this one because she's doing this thing really, really badly, and it's her fault that the children are falling away. I'm really struggling to cope with this question, the way it's worded, the insinuation behind it. And I can't get my mind past that to even take it seriously enough to even attempt to answer it. Do you guys understand where I'm coming from on this?
Conservative Christian, Biola, educated. This is what you're going to get. Sorry. But I will say that statistically speaking, there's some truth in the answer, even if it does come off misogynistic. The truth in every statistic I've ever read is that women tend to be way more religious than men. If it wasn't for women, there would pretty much be no churches. So even though they are run in a very male dominant way, they wouldn't actually run at all if it wasn't for women who tend to have a lot more faithful, a lot more believing, and they're the ones that are more interested in instilling religious values in children. So whereas that might sound misogynistic, I would just kind of reverse Sean's outlook. It's not because women are doing poorly at bringing their kids to church and that sort of thing. It's because men actually don't care nearly as much as women do. And so, yeah, if men were more involved in the process, the kids might stick to it a little bit more. That's probably true. But the fact is the men don't care nearly as much as the women do. And so the women become easy targets for the misogynistic type religions because they say, look, these are children raised by women. You can't raise a good man if all he knows is a woman's religion. It's queasy in that I know that Sean brings a real misogynistic spin to it, but it's not queasy in that it is true that women tend to care a lot more about this stuff.
I'm going to hold my fire for the answer.
Okay, I'll say one other thing then before I go into the answer, and heads up to the listeners. John goes quite long on his answer on this, and he mentions a few references in that, so I'll pick up the comments on the references after his answer. But before we get into his answer, there's also a mismatch between the question and the answer. The question is about the father's attitude to Christian faith, but in the answer, John goes more into the relationship of the leaver with their father. So there's a subtle mismatch out there. But in the context of John's answer, I'm going to set the scene a little bit from my personal relationship, because it's no secret for platform, anyone who's listened to a significant chunk of the episodes that we've done here on Still Unbelief. My relationship with my father as a young Christian and as a young adult Christian was stormy. It had been stormy ever since my parents' relationship failed. It's the fallout of a broken family. Anyone who's been through a painful parental divorce will probably understand the kind of thing that I'm referring to. So off the back of that, I had a fairly stormy relationship with my father, and since my mum died 14 years ago now, however long it was, our relationship has been an awful lot better, and that's great. It'll never be perfect because of the history, etc. But there's an insinuation in the answer here that the poor relationship with the father relates to people leaving the faith. And yes, I've left the faith, and yes, at a critical time I had a poor relationship with my father. But please, let's not mix up correlation and causation. I wasn't speaking to my father at the time that I was going through my deconstruction. It's not his fault. There was nothing that he did that spoilt my Christian faith that caused me to leave. It was all off my own back, and it was all science related, because that is my story about leaving. It's down to evidence and science. So yes, the facts, if you separate them, for me, might fit the narrative that John's about to spin. But please don't make the mistake of applying that narrative to me, because I deny that narrative works for me. If you genuinely want to hear more about that from me personally, readandpress@gmail.com. We can have that conversation, but I won't go into it further here. And so here's John's answer.
What about the role of the father or a broken relationship with the father that shapes deconversion? Let me throw one thing in there while you're thinking about this. John, the largest study I'm aware of in faith conversion was by Vern Bengston at USC. He wrote in a book by Oxford, I think it's 2013, called Families and Faith. And they studied 3,500 people, 35 years, 4 generations. And the most significant statistical factor in faith transmission was a, quote, warm relationship with the father. So on the flip side, does that broken relationship or the failure of the father to model this play a significant role in deconversion?
So my mistake there. I'd forgotten that Sean did this little thing here before John did his answer. So Sean made a reference to a USC study by Vern Bengston. I've probably butchered that pronunciation. I could not find the study itself, but I found a report on the study. And that's, interestingly, in the Latter-day Saints mag. Link in the show notes. It's intriguing that that's where I found the best report on the study, but I couldn't find the study itself. So if your skills are better than mine, I wish you luck in finding it, but my link, it will be in the show notes.
Oh, yeah, I really think so. And I think that social science points in this direction, just like you had mentioned. For example, Paul, I think his name is Wirtz, wrote a book called Faith of the Fatherless, probably 20 years ago. And in it, he goes through and identifies a handful of really well-known atheists and shows the relationship that they had with their dad. I think that psychology does a really good job of demonstrating what's called attachment theory, that we form attachments to certain authority figures in our life, primarily our parents, primary caregivers, at a really young age, and that just grows over time. And those attachments are either going to be anxious, or they're going to be avoidant, or they're going to be secure, or some kind of mixture of the three. And it's those people who seem to have the hardest time with an avoidant attachment style or an anxious attachment style that causes them to not connect well with parents, particularly fathers. And there's direct correlation. There's clear evidence that people who identify as atheists also have this kind of avoidant attachment or anxious attachment style. Actually, Liz Hall at Biola has just published on this not long ago. And so, yeah. Now, I don't want to say that this is a causal factor, like this is what's causing people to become atheists. Because there are other people who might have an avoidant attachment with their father or their mother, and yet it's found that God supplements that, and it drives them towards God. So it's not 100% clear that if you have bad relationships with your parents, particularly your father, you're going to lose your faith. But there is some evidence that points in that direction.
You make a point in your book that there's some people who deconvert from loving, gracious Christian communities and some from fundamentalist homes who don't. So there's a lot of factors at play here, but you're saying there is definitely some data where there's a strong correlation between a broken relationship with the father and deconversion, playing at least one part of it for some people. Fair enough, if I captured that right.
Yes, and recently Joseph Langston, who is an atheist, has published an article talking about what he calls CERT, C-E-R-T, which is credibility enhancing relationship traits or experiential relationship traits. And he says the number one thing that if parents want to pass on a faith to their children is that they need to live that faith out in a really authentic way, because it enhances the truthfulness of what the children believe when they see their parents actually living it out, and not just professing one thing and living it a different way. But the more someone is authentic in what they do, that really seems to ground that faith into that child, because they come to either respect it or they see it as intuitively good or healthy or wise or loving or something. But parents are the most significant influence in passing off their faith to their children by far.
John, it's so interesting here.
So there's clearly a message to be taken from this then. Men clearly are very bad role models when it comes to showing people how to live good Christian lives. Therefore, men should stand down from all kind of leadership and be replaced by women, because they're clearly better at it. Is that the takeaway from what we've just heard?
I just want to say that you should ignore my last answer. I was trying to be gracious to and charitable to their read on this, and there's no room for charitability. This is just BS. So what they're actually saying is what you were responding to, and so I just apologize for missing it the first time I listened to this recording. Is that if your primary parental relationship is with a woman, you don't have as much of a chance of sticking with belief in God than if your primary parental relationship is with a man. And this is a way for them to pass on this misogynistic idea that God had a reason for making a man the head of the house, and parents need to be stronger influences even in their kids' life than women. And when women are functionally equal or take the lead, it has horrible implications on faith. You should run, not walk away from this kind of nonsense idea. And I apologize for trying to be charitable earlier. It's what I get.
Absolutely. You tried to be nice and it bit you. So there were a couple of things that John mentioned here about a book again by somebody. I did actually find the book that he was mentioning, but I found that the book was completely funded by Templeton, so I've avoided putting a link to it in my show notes. I am sorry, I am that petty. And then the other one was, he mentioned Joseph Langston from CERTS, and he mentioned a report that he had recently put out. I utterly failed to find any reference to that report. I tried multiple ways. I simply couldn't find it anywhere, so I am sorry. I couldn't put a link in the show notes for anybody to follow. If you decide to try to look up Joseph Langston and CERTS, C-E-R-T-S, good luck with it. I hope you have better luck than I did on finding that, because I simply couldn't find it anywhere. Sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
No, it's okay. If someone finds it, email us at reasonpress@gmail.com, and we can put it in the show notes later with a nod to whoever finds it. So here's my problem with this question. It simply doesn't matter. If God decided to make some children more faithful if they had a better relationship with their father or mother, your God doesn't understand epistemology. The mere idea that some people are more faithful regarding Christianity because one or the other of their parents was a better role model doesn't make it true. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the claims of Christianity. What it has to do with is a sort of sophisticated popularity contest. What they're advocating here for those of you who don't see it, is not good epistemology. It's good indoctrination, and that should scare you.
Yeah, that was the point that I kind of wanted to make as well, Andrew. I feel that at this point that there's a bit of desperation here. Let's find something else that we can pin the reason for people leaving the faith, so that we don't have to address a question of, is Christianity true? Because that was the core question.
It's going to be like, were they breastfed or not breastfed? Oh, well, that's why they're atheists. It's going to be something like that.
Yes. Yeah, it does. There is definitely that kind of feeling about this. So before we sink any further, let's move on. Maybe the next question will lighten the mood a bit.
Yeah, because my dad for half a century has been studying youth, probably read as much studies as anybody alive. And when he talks about passing on your faith, he'll say, number one, build a relationship. Number two, model it. So It's interesting that a lot of data backs that up. Let's go to Toby Scoot's question. Another great question. Seriously, these questions are awesome. Says, did you have any deconversion stories from people who lost religious experiences, feelings completely, and deconverted? That was me. Came back years later. So if I'm reading this correctly, and you have this at the end of your book, are there people who deconvert and then reconvert back to the faith?
I have nothing to say about this question. Do you have anything to say about this question?
So I had Sean McDowell on SNS way back in the day. I confronted Sean about this because I think I wrote up in that write-up, there are various levels of doubt. And we talked about this with Gary Habermas as well. There are different levels of doubt. And there's something, just to make it a long story short, that I call doubt light versus stronger levels of doubt. And a lot of these Christians who like to hang their hat on, oh, well, I was an atheist or an unbeliever for a while. What they had was doubt light, which is a very different flavor of doubt than what most of us are talking about. They had some, questions about things that they couldn't answer, but they asked them and did their search within the context of a church. They never actually walked away from that. And so Sean McDowell is someone who had doubt light, and he will tell you that if you ask him more specifically about the kind of doubt he's talking about. And so I just find that a lot of these Christians like to bolster their resume, if you will, by talking about how, they lost their faith in God too and everything. No, they didn't. Shut up. It is not the same thing. He has admitted as much. Don't buy it.
I don't have anything, Matthew.
Okay, let's go for the answer then.
Yeah, at the end of the book, I have Lauren, who is one of the ladies who volunteered to be part of my study 7 years ago. Lauren was working for the Secular Student Alliance, which is like the anti-campus crusade for Christ. She had she's a public speaker, she's open atheist, she's written and published articles on atheism, and she identified as a Christian at one point in her life. She had a conversion experience, helped plant a couple churches, was helping to lead worship, married a Christian man, and then things started to go south. I'll spare you all of the heartache and all the stories, but it ended up that she renounced her faith, walked away, said that it was all a mistake, and then jumped into the deep end of a life that was just filled with. She starred in over 200 adult films, and in the last year, and I've kept in touch with her throughout all of those years, and in the last year, she had an experience that drove her back to her faith, and she announced on Facebook, to the shock and chagrin of many in her atheist community, that she was now a follower of Jesus once again, and that she loved him and that she wanted to live for him. So there are people who come back. There are websites that are starting to be populated with these kinds of stories. And and so that's really good news. Yeah.
Do you have any websites that you recall that are reconversion stories, or doesn't jump to mind?
No, I can't remember what the URLs are right now, but a lot of them, I mean, if you just look up reconversion or revangelical or, something along those lines, you might find some.
All right. Excellent.
I've not done that search phrase, so I don't know how many stories there are about that. It's something that I will do because I'm a little bit curious and I'm intrigued by some of those stories, and the story of Lauren that John's just recounted is an interesting and intriguing story. And yes, people's beliefs, situations change. People get convinced of different things at different stages of their life. And yes, if we're going to say that people convert to Christianity as adults and people convert away from Christianity as adults, then there'll be people who go in both directions as adults. They'll go atheist, Christian, atheist, or Christian, atheist, Christian again. They happen. Let's just accept it. Obviously, people who go both directions are going to be fewer than the people who go only in one direction, but they'll be there surely as a matter of statistics. It's going to happen.
I'm sorry. Look, this is some of the reason why I wanted to be on the show in the first place. This really gets my goat. I understand that, and what you're saying is true, and I understand, and it's nice that they want to take a victory lap and say, yeah, re-evangelicals. Here's the thing that you have to look at. I'm working on an article on this right now. Here's the thing you've got to look at for the adults who converted as Christians who converted as an adult, and those who came back to Christianity after leaving. There is usually, in the cases that I have read, which have been many and seen and interviewed, it's almost always some kind of story about hitting rock bottom. I was a drug dealing male prostitute, devil worshiper, and I killed my kid and ate his bones, and then I realized that was bad, and then I spent 5 years in jail and I found Jesus. Okay. Yes, so your life went to shit, and you realize that you need some kind of structure to get back. And I'm glad you found Jesus again. This is the story that you hear all the time. What you don't hear as often, I'm not saying it never happens, but this is not the same thing as someone who's living out a fairly reasonably good life as a well-rounded adult, and then deciding one day, you know what would make this better? Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's the story that you don't get to. And so there's a reason why Christians are always scraping the bottom of the barrel to find someone who's hit bottom, where, the only way to go from here is up. Have I got an offer for you?
Yeah, because when you're desperate, you will literally try anything to better your life.
This whole segment just pisses me off. John says, oh, well, I'll spare you the awful details of her divorce. But let me tell you the awful details of her adult entertainment industry life. What a sorry sack of crap.
Are you linking to any of those 200 adult videos?
I've got to get this off my chest.
Am I a bad man for admitting to not looking for any of them?
Kind of. I mean, if you're putting in all of these nice scholarly links, and I appreciate it. I mean, you could at least link to one of them.
Just stop.
I'm sorry.
None of this is no better than what they're doing. So, because she participated in some adult films, she's a bad person?
Oh, I don't think she's a bad person because of that at all. In fact, that doesn't sound like that's not what brought her out.
Goes on there that allows John to say she went through a bad divorce. And I won't tell you that story. But because I'm ashamed of her as an adult actress, I'll tell you those stories. I cannot tell you how offensive that is. And you should be offended by it too. Okay, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah, look, I let me just be clear. First of all, I don't have a problem with pornography as some kind of a bad thing. So that's a SNS show that we never did get to do, wanted to do. So but it sounds like, I may be reading wrong into what he said, but he mentioned her career, but he doesn't pin that on why she came back. He doesn't pin that on her hitting rock bottom. He doesn't actually say why she chose to come back and what turned her around. He just kind of mentioned that in passing, almost as if just to do some slut shaming. But it didn't seem connect it to what quote unquote turned her around. So maybe I just didn't hear it in the same way.
Maybe it's part of a surreptitious ploy to show that, to expose atheism as a depraved worldview that people should turn away from. Because of course she did that. She's atheist. I mean, let's be honest, there are Christians who think like that.
I have heard adults in the adult entertainment industry profess Christianity too. Maybe they're progressive Christians.
I've never met a prostitute that didn't either believe in God or didn't claim to be a Christian in some way. My father, he was big in prison ministries. I have also been part of inner city ministries, and so you meet a lot of prostitutes and drug dealers. They're all Christians by some description. So I don't even, if this is some kind of veiled slur against atheists. It doesn't land with actual atheists, and it only lands with people who have never actually gotten out there and done the work of working with people who have that lifestyle. You don't know a damn thing about what you're talking about if what you're trying to suggest is that those people are atheists.
I want to know what John means when he says it didn't sit well with some of her atheist community. Can I have names? What atheist came out and said anything about her leaving adult films?
I wasn't trying to shame her when I was joking about her professional career in the adult industry. There are a lot of people with professional careers in the adult industry who are decent human beings, and so I don't actually think of that as a black mark. But I know that Christians, that he makes his point with his audience by getting to say, look at what an awful person she is. That's the kind of person that God is looking for, kind of thing. Yeah, okay. We can have a talk about that, but I don't think either one of these people have ever done half the work on the streets in ministry as I have. And I don't think they actually know people like this at all. They know of people. They have a certain conception of what these people are, but they don't have a clue.
Yeah, by the way, I didn't think you were making up. I think you were poking fun at her or anything of the kind. You and I have talked about this, I think, in other places on the air. There are people who are in the adult entertainment industry who are there because they want to be there. And if your God doesn't want an adult entertainment industry, he's got the power to stop it. And by the way, that creep is watching the whole world every second of every day.
Right. I mean, it's this whole look. We're toward the end of the show, so I guess we're all punchy. There are all kinds of taboos around this stuff. But if you think about the kinds of things that you would rather your kids not do, or that you'd rather any kids not do, or that you think is worse for the world than others, and you just pit two things against each other. I know I'm going to get booted off the show and out of America for this, but if one of them is prostitution, or never mind even prostitution, just adult film, the adult film industry, and the other is being a soldier, you just kind of compare those two things. One of them is doing some harmless entertainment to a part of a population of society. Great. The other is killing people. And you might say, well, they're killing people for good reason. Well, I'd say she's entertaining people for good reason too. But if you have to choose, which one you want to do, killing people seems like the last thing on the list to me. But Christians are actually, especially this particular kind of conservative Christian, very big on soldiering and killing as many of the other as possible. So I find that juxtaposition to just be a little bit odd to me. So that said, since I'm losing my American citizenship even as I speak, do you have any room at all in Britain, Matt? Because I'm gonna need some place.
Okay, no one here is supporting the idea of people being forced into adult films or Constitution or anything of that sort against their will. There's no atheist here supporting human trafficking. What we are supporting is a notion of a lifestyle that can include things that Christians might not like. And if you are going to use this sort of story as an ad hominem attack against atheism, we're not going to stand for it. And if you can't understand the difference between adults making the free will decision, we'll have to have a conversation about free will, but adults making the free will decision to be involved in movies that have some sex in it versus being forced into those movies, then we simply can't have a nuanced conversation to begin with. But nobody here is supporting violence against anyone, men, women, or children.
I think the thought that has occurred to me, I think this is probably the right place to say it, is I'm quite active on Twitter now that I've become more involved with Still Unbelievable. And occasionally on Twitter, there's been some people who have been known to be atheists and communicating in the space have said they've become theists, even if they haven't gone all the way Christian. And there are predictable responses, usually insulting their intelligence in various other ways. And yes, I've seen, oh, you can't have been a real atheist to start with. I suspect that most people who say that are saying it ironically, but it doesn't give a good look. And I want to say to atheists, don't respond like that, please. It simply creates more embitterment where it's unnecessary, not required. At least try to make an effort to be more graceful. They are still people. They are still intelligent. They've changed their mind. Hey, we're all entitled to change our mind. Being nice to them doesn't have to validate their belief. Being nice to them isn't the same as saying what they believe is true. You can still be nice and say, okay, but I still don't agree with you. Let's try and take some of the heat out of the conversation where it's unnecessary. Yes, I know we're at the tail end of 2 episodes where there's a lot of heat, but I'm hopeful that that heat is justified. There are times when it's unnecessary. Don't ad hominem them. We've just criticised the gentleman on this video that we're doing for being slightly ad hominem-y. Let's not make things worse by doing the same. So that's my comment there that I just wanted to throw in there. Right, I think there's 2 questions left. We've got about 6 minutes of video left. Let's see what we get to.
Excellent. Again, here's another great question from John B. What is the single best advice we can give to a friend who's on a path of deconversion? In other words, if we have a kid, we have a friend, or a coworker, or a church member who's deconverting from their faith, what's a helpful way that Christians can respond to them?
Right, I can give you a long list of podcasts that you can listen to. Right, there's Still Unbelievable, there's The Graceful Atheist, there's a 2, there's many more anyway, but definitely those 2. Right, what suggestions do you 2 guys have?
Look, anyone who is on the verge of, or who is exploring their doubts. I mean, we call them doubts. Christians call them doubts, but really it's their beliefs. They're not exploring their doubts. They're exploring their beliefs. They're trying to figure out what they actually believe, what they do believe, what they don't believe. You can help them find good sources for good belief. But the most you can do is just be there for them, get out of their way, whether they're an atheist exploring Christianity or a Christian exploring deconversion, is to be the friend that you have always been to them through the process, during that and beyond. And don't fill up their head with a bunch of noise of your advice, which is usually your fear that they're going to leave you somehow and go to some other side. You need to stay out of it because their search for their beliefs is not about you. And so I find that what the Christians do the wrongest here is they insert their own fears as if, someone's search for truth is about some third party. It is not. So when someone's going through that, it's one of the hardest times in their life. They're doing one of the bravest things that they can do by doing it in public and letting you know about it. So continue to be their friend. Get out of the way and don't make it about you.
Yeah.
I'm in a little different. I agree with everything David said, but I'm in a little different place. If you really feel like you want them to stay in Christianity, and that's why you're engaging in the conversation, and you're the kind of radical Christian that can't be their friend afterwards, if that's where you are, then you have to first figure out why they're leaving. Are they leaving for some emotional reason because the church treated them awfully? If that's the answer, then you should be better. And you should stand with them against how they were treated. So let me tell you, people leave churches every day for awful treatment. I've shared in the past that I worked with Recovering from Religion. I worked the Hotline Project. I haven't done so recently. I hear stories of people who leave Christianity horrible because of horrible abuse, and I heard those stories all the time. So if they're leaving because Christianity was horrible, then make it better. If they're leaving because the Christian worldview is poorly evidenced, and that's the story of the people here, then the only thing you need to do is show that Christianity is not poorly evidenced. And if you can't do that, then get out of the way. But either way, it is really on you. And the common theme here is for you to be better. Be better emotionally, be better evidentially. But if they're leaving, it's because there was a problem with Christianity. And if you want them to stay, you have to show them why. And cajoling won't work.
Earlier, I mentioned about friends of mine who I lost, for lack of a better word, as part of my deconversion story. I want to tell you about another friend of mine who I've known since we were both single men in our young 20s, in our early 20s. We had some adventures together, parties around at my flat, which always went practically till the next dawn. And he's been there in my life all the way through. And he was unable to attend my wedding because he was unfortunately attending a memorial service of another friend of his who had died. It's just highly unfortunate that the two dates clashed. His name is Steve, my friend that is. He is a Church of England vicar. I remember him telling me about him entering the ministry. In fact, I've seen a couple of friends enter the Church of England ministry and been to their ordinations. While I was a Christian, I hasten to add. In fact, I'd have still gone even if I wasn't a Christian because these are friends that I support. He's moved around the country and I lost contact with him for a couple of years and we regained contact, etc. I eventually managed to get round to telling him because this is one of the few people that I told face to face that I no longer believed. He was obviously sympathetic. I think he said, "I'm sorry," which is the kind of thing I would expect a Christian who knows me to say. So I'm quite cool with that as a response. But he did want to hear my story. And so he made the effort a few months later to come over and see me. And we sat in a pub and he listened to my story, completely non-judgmental, didn't try to counter any of the points that I made. He simply listened to the story that I told. And it didn't shake or affect our friendship one little bit. He is still a good friend and I've been over to see him several times since, and he's been over here a couple of times, and our respective wives are friends as well, which is always a bonus, obviously. And he is, of all the friends I've had, he is the one friend I should, at the very beginning, have put far more trust in. And it's my loss that I didn't put more trust into him. He is one who I should have been able to predict a really good and really positive reaction. But please, Christians should be more like Steve. Non-judgmental, listen to the story. Don't try to address the points. Just let your friends tell their story in their way. And don't let the friendship change. Be there all the time, every time, for the big and for the small. Because that's what they need more than anything else. And I think this is of critical importance. Do not, under any circumstances, expect them to come back, because if they think that that's the expectation you've got on them, then the friendship is going to wane. Because if they think that's the only reason why you're hanging around to be their friend for that witness opportunity, you've probably lost the friendship. There needs to be no ulterior motive. They're your friend after all. And that's what friends do. Here is John's answer to that question, because we spent a bit of time answering it ourselves.
One, I think we want to listen to them really well. I think we want them to know that we accept them unconditionally as human beings made in the image of God. They may renounce their faith at the end of the day, but I think that we want them to know that we still love them, that we care for them, that our friendship is always open, even though at some point it might become distant and strained just because of practical factors of now working and living within different communities of faith and non-faith. But I think that that's really helpful. But I also think that it's helpful if you have the right relationship and if you have the right time to ask them really what it is that's causing the problem. I want to be careful how I phrase this. I suspect that there's at least two things going on. There's the conscious things that are going on. There's the conscious, cognitive, self-aware thoughts that people are having. But I also think that there's a lot going on beneath the surface, underneath the hood, that perhaps often we're just not aware of that's taking place. Emotions, values, expectations often are the big chunk of the iceberg that's underneath the water that we don't see, but manifest in the part that we do see, which is things like hypocrisy, or there's a contradiction in the Bible, or God isn't really loving. Well, if you listen and you're careful and you ask enough, sometimes you can discover that maybe this problem is with certain expectations of God that we're not warranted to have. God never promised us health, never promised us wealth. He never promised us that life would be easy. In fact, he promises us quite the opposite. And then when it comes to the Bible, I just don't understand how you could harmonize all these synoptic gospel problems that I'd never seen before. Well, why is that a problem for you? What do you expect the Bible to do? And if the Bible doesn't meet that expectation, should you maybe question your expectation before you question the entire faith and throw the entire thing out? Now, the other thing that can be going on, and this is beyond our capacity to investigate, is I often think that there's probably a spiritual component that's taking place, because I think our heart is desperate and deceitfully wicked. And in Hebrews, writing to Christians, he says, don't have your hearts be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin, and do what the Israelites did, abandon their faith in God. And so I think that that's probably also at play in a lot of deconversion narratives, but I don't say too much about it because we don't have a diagnostic tool for it. And it often just comes out as insulting to say that you're really leaving the faith because you just don't want to be in the faith. I don't think that's all that helpful.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. Number one, just listen to people, which is a way of loving people. Number two, you talked about just loving and be present and assuring the person, hey, we're still in this relationship together. Things have changed, but I am in this with you for the long run. And third, you kind of hinted at this idea of reframing for people. That's why listening very well, I think, is helpful. And for example, you talk about in the book, sometimes people think to...
I'm going to stop it there. Do you have any thoughts, chaps, on John's response? He said some of the things that we said, but he also said a few different things as well.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that whole bit about I can't harmonize the synoptic gospels, all of that bad stuff in the Old Testament really does look bad to me. And I can't square the idea of suffering in the world. All of those sound to me like pretty damn good reasons to doubt. Mm-hmm. If you can't harmonize the Bible, should you really stick with it? Okay, Dave, that's my point. Your turn.
Wow. So here's the deal. It's completely the wrong advice. I mean, he started off well, and then it just went to this train wreck. So this idea that you shouldn't merely listen to what the person says, but that you should evaluate the answer to see if it is justified. And of course, as a Christian, you're going to realize, no, the answer is not justified. So I see what the problem is, sir. You have the wrong expectations of God. Shame on you. Now that I've fixed you, you're ready to get back to your faith again, right?
Yeah, and it was really nice to hear that Christians don't have a problem with motivation. They understand their conscious motivations perfectly well, right? There's never anything going on under the surface, this sort of iceberg analogy where we see 10% of it and the rest of it's hidden underneath. Well, it's good to know that Christians don't have that problem, and therefore we can just trust our Christian friends to lead us out of all of the turmoil and indecision, et cetera, except for one thing. People are deconverting at record rates.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to take my last bite right here. It was toward the beginning of what he said, where he says, yes, affirm that you still love them as a person made in the image of God. This is a non-believer. And the only way that what you're really saying is, well, the only reason I still love you and that I care to reach out for you is because religious stuff. It's because, so, it would be appropriate to ask the question, so wait a minute. If I wasn't made in the image of God, then would you just kick me to the curb? Because the implication is, yes, I would. But because you're in the image of God, I still love you. Shut up. Oh, God, how I hated every word after that. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, I guarantee you're going to have something to say after this. I'm going to.
Nope.
And you. Yeah.
Nope. How much time you got, Matt?
Okay.
Test me. Go on, test me.
Here's the beauty. I loved the end of this. I loved the end. David, I think you've already said something about it. Don't question God, question your expectations. What? I just want to ask again. What?
No.
What the hell?
No.
Okay.
No.
Dave, you're gonna see. I've teed it up for you nicely, and I'm going to leave it to you in that.
Okie doke. So you've got a person who is traumatized enough to have had this terrible face-to-face with their own faith and conscience, and they have come to you about it. And your solution is to re-traumatize them with this idea that the reason you're going through this ordeal is because your faith wasn't good enough. But what I really want to do is lay the guilt on you even thicker. And this is the advice that he is giving people. Are you kidding me? You know what? Just please, Christians, follow this advice. Follow this advice to the letter. May the Exodus move even faster. Because this is the truest, surest way that on their way out, they will never look back.
Okay, Matthew, we covered a lot, and you were really nice. So you've got to round this off.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play Sean's last little bit out just to have a nice little interlude.
Believe in God is to have certainty. I know you reference this. I can't tell you over and over again how many people say, well, I couldn't be certain anymore. So I try to help them reframe and say, is it reasonable and wise to expect certainty in your relationship with God? And if you don't have certainty, does it make the most sense to not believe? These are just the kinds of questions I help people reframe as best I can. It sounds like you do that too. I have so many more questions for you, and those who are watching,
In summary, when I first watched this video, I was hoping for something interesting because I've seen Sean talk before, and he talks like a conservative Christian, but generally comes across mostly well. And so I thought this video would have that. And again, John Marriott, I've heard on the Graceful Atheist podcast, that came across pretty well there. And, we all love and respect David over on the Graceful Atheist. So I thought the two together here, this will be an intriguing and interesting video, but it's not. I was really, really disappointed by this first time I watched it, which is why I watched it again and said to Andrew, we need to cover this. I know other atheist content producers have also covered this video, but there is a lot wrong with this. And yeah, which is why we've done 2 episodes scratching at it and poking at it. Yeah, there's some good bits in there as well, but it's mostly bad. And all it does is it reinforces a feeling that I have that when Christians talk about people who leave, they get some really big things wrong. And this is clearly an example of that. And then we need Christians to engage far more honestly and far more humbly, emphasis on the latter, with those who leave, because there's not enough effort being put in to understand all the reasons why people leave, and there's too much effort being put into explaining away the awkward parts of the reasons why people leave, and there's also too much effort being put on how do we get them back and how do we stop the slide. Yeah, there are some very fundamental issues which Christianity can't address when it comes to people leaving, and it's all about physical material evidence. People are getting more understanding about science, the scientific process, certainty or lack of certainty in science, why things that you're uncertain about, which is a bit that Sean mentions right at the very end of this episode, and why being uncertain about something is greater reason for rejecting it completely than it is about accepting it with uncertainty. So there's lots and lots of stuff to deal with there, which Christians get completely wrong. And this is where things like this video completely miss it. And there's not enough effort being done by Christians to get and to understand the atheist perspective. All they're focusing on is how to counter the atheist perspective from their perspective. They're not really putting in the effort to get and to understand the atheist perspective from the atheist perspective. And that's the fundamental that's wrong in all of this video and in all other conversations that Christians have in this subject space about deconversion.
I've got a closing thought. I actually thought there was another question in there. So when I listened to this thing, I wanted to talk about the idea of creationism, young earth, and the science of Genesis and that sort of thing, because they alluded to it.
Yeah, that got touched earlier on, but I don't think they ever came back to it.
I thought there was another mention of it. It could just be that it was something I talked about last week and I got that confused with this week. So my apologies there. It's an important idea. And it's an important part of why I'm on this side of the fence and not the other side of the fence. And so there are a couple of things that I cannot stand. One is a term from sci-fi geekery called retconning, which is a retroactive continuity, trying to go back in the past and change an idea so that it's not a contradiction and it just kind of fixes a problem. So you retcon it. And the other is gaslighting. Neither one of these terms are terms that I was familiar with when I left the church, but the ideas were there. And so part of the retconning that I saw going on was the move of some Christians, even some conservative Christians, to kind of go back and insert how some of the new findings that we were having with astronomy and such were in the age of the earth and that sort of thing fit in very comfortably with the Genesis story. And, if you read it as this is what they really meant by blank, then you see there's no contradiction at all. But of course, to get there, you have to retcon the entire thing. And I recognize that even as a very young person, and I found that quite annoying. And the other thing was this further movement that I started noticing much closer to my exit from religion was going back and saying things like, "Oh, we never said that the Bible had to be inerrant. I don't know where you got that from," or "Oh, no, we never said that, the universe was 6,000 years old. I don't know where you got that from." No, we never said that there was any kind of contradiction between religion and science. I don't know where you got that from. This type of gaslighting just annoyed the hell out of me because I know exactly where I got it from. I got it from you. I got it from the 10,000 sermons I heard before I was 5 years old. I got it from every book that I bought from the books because I used to buy Christian books and read them. That's where I got it from. And now that you find these ideas problematic, you want to kind of go back and say, oh, no, we never said that. Shut up. Yes, you did. And you can't go back and fix it now. It's too late. You have nailed your colors to the wrong mast, and I will not let you rewrite history. We know what you said. We know what you believed. And we know what you taught people like me. So don't go back now and say, oh, man, that's too bad that you were in that one conservative denomination. Shut up. We know what you did last night. Okay? And so this push to retcon and gaslight your way out of difficulties that are embarrassing to you now, people like me, I'm never going to let you get away with it. Never going to let you get away with it. And I hope that other people who've left the church don't ever let you get away with it either.
What you're talking about, Dave, was back in the same portion of this conversation where Sean mentions Gary Habermas. And he says that Gary pointed out that the only thing that would make Christianity untrue is if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. I just want people to take that thought seriously. This was back during this show. You don't have to rewind to the last episode. This was somewhere in the first quarter of this show. So certainly it would be the case that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christians would think that disproved Christianity. But that's not a good reason to believe Christianity. And so if somebody rose from the dead, what would that tell you about anything else that they said? If Jesus rose from the dead, would that tell you that he was the Son of God? That's a claim that being raised from the dead doesn't substantiate. If Jesus was raised from the dead, would that actually mean that women who are not treated particularly well in conservative Christian churches should be treated the way they're treated? Well, those things don't seem to make sense. So I flatly deny that even if there was someone raised from the dead, you could trust everything else that they said, every other claim that they made. What makes Christianity untrue would have nothing to do with whether some guy was raised from the dead. If I told you today that I had the ability to build a home computer, and because I could build a home computer, you should trust me to repair airplanes, you'd think I was crazy. And you should. They have nothing to do with each other. Nothing whatsoever. And if Christianity is to be demonstrated, every one of its claims has to survive on its merits. And if the only kind of Christian you are is the kind that says, oh, well, I'm a Christian because I believe Jesus was raised from the dead, okay, fine. Then don't talk about doctrine. Don't talk about going to church. Leave all the rest of that stuff out. But Christianity makes all kinds of claims that it expects people to believe. And even if you think somebody was raised from the dead, all of those other claims can't be proven by it.
Thank you, both of you. This review has gone on longer than I expected. We've picked apart in more detail than I expected. Hopefully that's a good thing because it needed to be done. Listeners, thank you for taking the time to listen. If you disagree or want to pick up on anything that we've said, reasonpress@gmail.com. That's the email address to contact us. We welcome any and all feedback. Even if you want to criticize us for what we've done, we will take that criticism on board. That's hopefully that we're humble enough to do that. If you have access to if you've seen any other commentaries or videos examining deconversion that other Christians have done and you think that we ought to do the similar job on those, send them our way. We'll watch those videos and we'll give our thoughts on that. If you'd like to join us for discussing one of these videos, because I'm sure there's plenty more out there, we would welcome you on as a guest. reasonpress@gmail.com again is email address. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again with some other subjects, but just a little point that I'll give just as a final takeaway on this to give you guys a bit of warning. I've got a very big season coming up ahead of me, the tail end of this year. Most of you will know that I do amateur drama as well in my free time. I've got a very busy next 6 to 8 weeks in the amateur drama that I'm doing. I'm out 4 nights a week. It's very, very busy. It makes it much harder for me to arrange recording sessions and editing time. That might mean that I slip our schedule from the 2 weeks that I've got used to this year to 3 weeks. Please forgive me for doing that, or there might even be a gap. Please don't get concerned if there's a gap of more than a couple of weeks, because it's purely down to that. We'll pick up again when my play season is over at the end of November. We'll try to get some stuff in though in the meantime before that, and certainly we'll be picking up again in the new year, and I'll reschedule my amateur dramatic stuff so that it doesn't quite have such a devastating effect on our recording, because I've enjoyed what we've managed to do this year. But there will be a subtle change as we run out this year. See you in the next episode. Listen to you in the next episode. Thank you once again, and catch you next time. Thank you both for coming on and enjoying this marathon with me. I've enjoyed it. We will do it again. Good night.
Wow. Yeah.
You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.